I hate to be that guy, but aren't they more like the great-great-great-great-grandchildren of time? This is a review of the Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode, Children of Time. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know what Odo looks like as a sexy senior, be warned, spoilers beyond this point. Well, thanks to this episode, we finally know why ships on Star Trek shows are always so packed with nameless, faceless extras who just seem to mill around in the background, not doing much of anything. They're in case the ship crashes on a remote planet and the senior officers want to settle down and get married and have kids. They're breeding stock. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. Let's start at the beginning. The Defiant is on its way home from a mission in the Gamma Quadrant. Odo, Kira, and Dax are hanging out in the mess hall, and Kira lets it slip that she and her steady boyfriend, Shakar, are no longer a thing. Apparently, the Prophets told them to break up. And exactly who were the Prophets speaking to as they both prayed to the Prophets? Was it Shakar or Kira who looked up suddenly and said to the other, "The Prophets are saying we should see other people"? Anyway, Odo's reaction to learning that Kira is unexpectedly single is to say, "Welp, gotta go transform into a big glob of maple syrup and sit in a bucket for 12 hours, bye," and leave the room as soon as possible. Later on the bridge, Dax picks up some interesting readings from a planet in a nearby solar system. Everyone is tired from the mission and ready to get home, but Dax insists that they stop and check it out because there's this weird quantum energy barrier surrounding the planet. And by the time they get back this way, the fluctuations in the barrier will have grown too strong to blah, blah, blah. The point is, if they want to study this interesting planet, it's now or never. So, Cisco agrees, and they adjust the Defiant's shields and fly through the weird barrier. It's a bumpy ride, and Kira takes a pretty good jolt from her computer console, but she insists she's fine afterward, and everyone else seems okay, and then they get a video call from the surface of the planet. There are people living there, and they're human, mostly. A man, Yedrin, and a woman, Miranda, appear on the view screen, and they say, "Hey, glad you could make it. Come on down, because have we got news for you." Cisco beams down with Dax, Warf, and OBrien, and they meet with Miranda, who introduces herself as Miranda O'Brien, and Yedrin, who introduces himself as Yedrin Dax. "Surprise," says Miranda, "we're your descendants." So here's what happened, or will happen. Here's what will have happened. When the Defiant attempts to leave orbit of this weird planet, on its way back through the quantum barrier, it encounters a temporal anomaly that throws it 200 years into the past and causes the ship to crash on this planet. With no way to repair the ship and no hope of rescue because it's 200 years ago and they're tens of thousands of light years from Federation territory, they decide to make the best of their situation and settle down and found a colony. Fast forward 200 years, and there are now around 8,000 people living here, all descended from the crew of the Defiant. Miranda and Yedrin give Cisco and the others a tour of their little town. It's nice, and the people seem nice, but Cisco points out something obvious to Miranda and Yedrin that is not so nice. For them, now that we know there's a time anomaly in that quantum barrier, when we get ready to leave orbit this time, we can anticipate and avoid it. And if we do that, and don't go back 200 years, and don't crash, none of you will exist. Of course, Yedrin says, but maybe not. I have a plan. Yedrin explains that when the Defiant passed through the barrier the first time, the energy discharge that zapped Kira momentarily created a duplicate of her. Oh, Kira's fine for now, but in a few weeks, that zap she took is going to melt her brain and she's going to die. So it's super important they get her back to Deep Space Nine so Bashir can treat her. Anyway, Yedrin's plan is to recreate that duplicating effect for the entire ship, so that this time, when the Defiant flies back through the barrier, the original Defiant will pass through and return home, while at the same time an identical copy of the Defiant will hit the anomaly and go back in time and crash, so that the crew of that Defiant can found the colony and everyone who's here now can still be here. Cisco's like, "Sounds good, let's do it." Yedrin says, "Really?" And Cisco says, "Of course. You think I want to wipe out an entire colony? I only do that to defeat my personal enemies. You all seem cool." Back on the Defiant, in sickbay, Kira, who, again, is fine for now, but doomed if they can't get back to the station, receives a surprise visit from the version of Odo who's been living on the planet for the last 200 years. The original Odo is temporarily out of commission, stuck in goo mode due to the quantum interference surrounding the planet, but this Odo has learned to adjust to the interference, and has also improved his shape-shifting skills, so that now he looks like he's about to tell Kira why she should be booking her hotels through Trivago. Actually, what Daddy Odo tells Kira is that he's spent 200 years missing her since she died shortly after the crash, and he loves her. He's not here to try and start something up between the two of them. He just wants to see her and spend a little time with her, and show her around the settlement they've built on the planet. Kira's like, it's a date. Sounds romantic. They visit Kira's grave, and Kira says, I know that if we don't go back to the station, I'll die, but I don't know, this whole scheme of using technobabble to avoid making a choice in this situation so we get to have it both ways and go home while still having this colony of our descendants exist, it just doesn't feel right to me. Meanwhile, Yedrin and Jadzia inform Cisco that Yedrin's duplication plan looks good. It's going to work. Meanwhile, Warf meets his descendants. Sort of. The Klingons. They aren't all Warf's direct descendants, but they have chosen to honor the Klingon ways, which for them apparently means living on their own and not helping the others in the colony. That tracks. Meanwhile, OBrien hates this whole thing. This colony is full of his descendants, which means after the Defiant crashed, he got busy with someone other than Keiko and had a bunch of kids. And Miles, devoted though occasionally ambivalent wife guy that he is, does not like that. Meanwhile, Dax runs up to Cisco, who is playing catch with some neighborhood kids, and tells him, yeah, actually, it's not going to work. Yedrin falsified the data he gave us to make it look like the duplicate Defiant plan was feasible, but it's not. If we do exactly what Yedrin wants us to do, there won't be two Defiants. There'll just be one, us, and we'll go back in time and crash. Yedrin fesses up when confronted with this. Yes, he tried to trick the crew of the Defiant into crashing, but only to preserve the existence of himself and everyone he knows. Cisco understands and is even sympathetic to a point, but ultimately his loyalty is to his crew, and he can't justify stranding them on this planet or sacrificing Kira's life, not even for the lives of everyone in this colony. And you know what? Yedrin and the others in the colony accept it. They're not happy, but they get it. And they take it well. I mean, mostly, the Klingons do walk up to Warf and ask him to stab them to death, but other than that, one person who isn't okay with it is Kira. She and Daddy Odo return to her gravesite, and she says, this is where the path the prophets laid out for me is meant to end. I can't let Captain Cisco take us home and sacrifice all of these people. Daddy Odo isn't thrilled to hear this. He loves Kira, and even though it means the end of his existence, he'd rather she go home and live out the rest of her life than wind up dead and buried 200 years ago. But Kira is determined not to erase the colony from history, and she says so during a meeting with the other Defiant senior officers. Warf takes her side too, and Dax seems sympathetic as well. Then there's OBrien, who's like, look, I don't care about those 8,000 people. I don't know them. What I do know is I'm going home and getting a blowjob from my wife and hugging my two beautiful children. Not at the same time, obviously, though probably not all that far apart either. Being a parent is so weird. Cisco takes OBrien's side and makes his decision clear and final. They're going home as soon as repairs to the Defiant are complete. In the meantime, they beam down to the planet for a last look around at the settlement that will soon never have existed. They find the residents of the settlement, who know what's about to happen to them, or at least the adults do, preparing to plant their crops for the coming season, just as they would have done if this was an ordinary day and not their last day. The Defiant crew is so moved by this that they join in and spend the day helping out with the planting. Even OBrien helps out, and eventually, after finally spending time with the people here, particularly the children, he changes his mind. He goes up to Cisco and says, we can't do it. We can't let these people die. So, it's decided. The Defiant will fly into the temporal anomaly and go back in time and crash. Daddy Odo isn't happy about it for Kira's sake, but Kira and everyone else on the Defiant seems at peace with it. They all record messages for their families and launch them out of the quantum barrier aboard a probe. Then Dax engages the autopilot programmed to Yedrin's specifications to guarantee they hit the anomaly and crash in the past just like they're supposed to. And the Defiant breaks orbit and passes safely through the barrier. No time travel. No crash. OBrien reports that the autopilot abruptly changed their course and caused the ship to veer away from the time anomaly before contact. Cisco has Kira scan the surface of the planet, and there's no sign of the settlement or its inhabitants. They're all gone. Later, Kira's alone in her quarters when she gets a visit from Odo. Regular Odo. Daddy Odo has been erased from history. Odo and Kira talk about their feelings for each other, and they mutually decide that they need time to figure things out. And then Odo says, oh, by the way, before he left the ship the last time, Daddy Odo linked with me while I was in my goo form, and he told me everything, including that he was the one who reprogrammed the Defiant's autopilot so that it wouldn't go back in time and crash. Kira is shocked. She says, but what about those 8,000 people? Why would he do that? And Odo says, he did it for you, so you wouldn't die. He loved you. Kira's like, and that makes it right? And Odo says, I don't know. He thought so. Anyway, see you tomorrow. The end. God, I love it when the creators of Deep Space Nine choose violence against their own audience. If you think about it, the only thing this episode accomplishes in terms of the larger story of the series is to get Odo's feelings for Kira out in the open. So what happened? The writers were having their big pitch meeting at the start of the season, and someone said, hey, you know what we should do this year? Finally have Kira find out that Odo's secretly in love with her. And someone else said, great idea, but how do we do it? And someone else said, why don't we murder 8,000 people plus most of their ancestors with time travel? And Ira Stephen Bear said, all right! So there are levels to this episode, and that's one of the things I love about it. The main dilemma of the episode places the heroes in a no-win situation. Either they go through with the crash and wind up stranded in the past on this planet and never see any of their family and friends again, or they avoid the crash and go home, and all of their descendants on this planet cease to exist. There is no good, easy, obviously correct solution to that problem, and the episode doesn't pretend that there is. But the episode does briefly float the possibility of a kind of technological compromise. And because this is Star Trek, and particularly the technobabble-infested TNG era of Star Trek, we in the audience go along with it because we've seen this sort of thing before many times. Oh, what's that? You can create a subspace duplicate of the ship and its entire crew and have them crash land in the past to found the colony while the original ship and crew gets to go home? Sounds like a completely reasonable option to me. This isn't just a way for the characters to cheat their way out of having to choose one option over the other. It's a way for the writers of the episode to avoid having to choose as well. The inhabitants of this planet, the descendants of the Defiant crew, they seem like lovely people who've made a happy and fulfilling life for themselves here. But in order for the Defiant crew to leave and for the series to continue, these lovely people need to be wiped out of existence. Wouldn't it be nice if the heroes could leave to continue their adventures and the existence of the people on the planet could be preserved? Why not both? Then, after introducing that possibility of a perfect technobabble solution, the episode rips it away. No, sorry, you don't get to do that. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to pick one. You might not like either option, but you have to choose one, and your choice will determine not only your fate, but the fates of many, many, many other people. And this is just something I think everyone watching this should keep in mind for the future, on the off chance that it ever comes up again. What that choice ultimately comes down to is one of the classic Star Trek ethical principles. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. After the illusory technobabble solution is off the table, Cisco and the other main characters decide to go home and doom the settlement to oblivion. But then, gradually, beginning with Kira, the one who has the most to lose, or at least the most to lose the soonest, since she knows she'll die shortly after the crash, they start to change their minds. They want to go home, they want to go back to their lives, but then they see these people, their great-grandchildren, living, working, playing, participating in the community that they've built, except for the Klingons, but what are you going to do? And our heroes realize that they can't do it. They choose the welfare of others over their own immediate desires. Again, worth remembering just in case. Then, and here's my favorite part, after they've chosen to do the selfless thing, to go through with the crash and preserve the existence of their descendants, their plan fails through no fault of their own, and their descendants are erased anyway. That, in and of itself, is a kick in the teeth, though one we probably expected. It's not as if the crew of the Defiant crashing on this planet and staying there for the rest of the series was ever a serious option, creatively speaking. But then, the final twist of the knife. They didn't just happen to avoid the crash because something went wrong or they failed to anticipate some variable or another. They avoided the crash and erased their descendants because someone intentionally programmed the ship's autopilot to make it happen. And it wasn't just anybody. It was Odo, one of them. A version of Odo who's apparently been starring in Cialis commercials in a now-eliminated alternate timeline, but still, Odo. One of the fundamental principles of effective storytelling is having characters make meaningful choices. The story doesn't just happen. The plot doesn't advance on its own. It happens as a result of the choices made by the characters. And in order for characters to make meaningful choices, the writer who is making those characters up has to make choices too. That's what storytelling is at a very basic level. Making choices and dealing with the consequences. Cisco and the others are confronted with a choice in this episode, and they aren't allowed to cheat and employ a Star Trek magical technology solution. It's them and the lives they've known, or the lives of the people living on this planet. They have to make a choice. And they do. And they make an honorable, compassionate, humane choice. And then the people they chose to save are wiped out anyway. Why? Because someone else made a different choice. And that choice had consequences. It's a solid meat and potatoes Star Trek ethical dilemma. It's fundamentally sound and superbly executed storytelling, and the ending invites us to grapple with how our morality is mediated by our emotions. We aren't robots. The characters on Deep Space Nine aren't robots. Odo is not a robot. He's a changeling. Pay attention. Kira, trading the rest of her life for the lives of the 8,000 people living on that planet, plus all the generations that led up to them, is the right choice, the moral choice, but not to Odo. He makes a selfless choice too, only his selfless choice doesn't benefit those 8,000 people. It benefits Kira at the cost of those 8,000 people. Yet Odo does it anyway because he loves Kira. He cares more about her than he does about everyone else on that planet put together. The episode doesn't tell us that he's right for doing that, but it doesn't tell us he's wrong either. It tells us he was willing to do it, to erase all of those people and himself for her. I like the character work in this episode a lot. The reactions to the situation we get from our main characters are varied and all make sense for those characters, as do the ways in which they evolve over the course of the episode. OBrien, being determined to get home to his wife and kids no matter what the cost to these people he just met, feels right. But so does his late change of heart. OBrien's tough and pragmatic, but he's not a monster. He's a husband and a father, and because he's a good husband and a father, he ultimately can't choose to reunite with his own family at the cost of the lives of all these other families. Similarly, Warf connects with the self-styled Klingons on the planet and is moved when one of them expresses regret that they won't have a place among the honored dead because ceasing to exist because my parents were never born is not a worthy death. Cisco, also a parent, connects with the kids in the settlement right away. One of my favorite moments in the episode is when Cisco is playing catch with a few of them as Dax approaches to tell him about Yedrin's fake duplicate plan. As he and Dax walk off to discuss the situation privately, Cisco fires off one last throw of the baseball behind his back without even looking. What a fucking boss. Beyond the regular cast, the defiant Descendants we meet come off pretty well too. Yedrin and Miranda, played by Gary Frank and Jennifer Parsons, respectively, the two Descendants we see the most of, both play as real people. Yedrin, who is a descendant of Dax and carries the Dax symbiont, falls into a comfortable, familiar rapport with both Jadzia and Cisco that feels believable. And while the Klingons are kind of funny, especially the fact that we only ever see 3 of them and they apparently always travel together, the idea that on this planet, the concept of being Klingon has evolved from a biological identity to a cultural one, which apparently anyone willing to live by their customs can choose to become a part of, is interesting. I especially like Brota, the leader of the Klingon clan, played by Brian Everett Chandler, in a performance that proves you don't need a bumpy forehead or a rubber nose to convincingly portray a post-TOS Klingon. But out of everyone, I think my favorite performance comes from a regular cast member who is playing not quite his regular character. Rene Auberjonois as the alternate version of Odo, or Daddy Odo, as I have christened him without the faintest trace of embarrassment or regret. It's remarkable how he's able to adjust his performance to give us a plausible version of Odo, who is still recognizable as Odo, but who is also clearly a very different person than the guy we know. He looks a little different, sure, a little more human, and that helps, as does Renee's more relaxed, open vibe. But it's more than that. This Odo is vulnerable and gentle. He seems less closed off emotionally than the Odo we know, but at the same time, he seems even lonelier. He's been grieving Kira's death for 200 years, and if he was over it before, he's definitely not over it anymore when he's standing there talking to her. It's a painful, humanistic performance that makes it totally clear why this Odo does what he does in the end. Children of Time is written by Renee Echevarria from a story by Gary Holland and Ethan H. Kalk, and directed by Alan Croker, and yeah, I love this episode. From its basic concept, through the smart and fearless execution of that concept, to the inevitable gut punch of an ending, it's a great story that showcases the show's regulars at their best, while also introducing us to some intriguing newcomers. Just, don't get attached. Those are my thoughts on Children of Time. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Join me next time as we continue this batch of reviews of episodes about alternate timelines with an episode from the 4th season of Star Trek Voyager, which some folks consider a classic, a modest little two-parter titled Year of Hell. That's next week. See you then. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.